everyone. Welcome to season 1, episode 4. Oh my gosh, that means we are halfway through the first season after this episode. Yeah.
Man, that flew by.
Right? I know. And this conversation that we had with Mary Laura Philpott was just really awesome because we want to make sure we get a caretaker's point of view, for each season. Just make sure that, because we know that epilepsy involves so many other people than just the person with it. And I was so excited to have this conversation with her because she's a writer and a really fucking amazing writer. And I even stalked her at a conference one time before we were even doing this podcast. I waited for her to show up to sign my book. And she was so nice to me. And even though I was being super creepy and can we get a picture, and,
right.
She's just the coolest person. So I'm so excited for everyone to listen to this.
She's so easy to talk to, so friendly, so warm.
Right.
And I'm not a mom of someone with epilepsy. I just have it. But I mean, she made it so relatable and just
totally
easy to talk about. It was not this big scary thing in the room.
Absolutely. So we hope you guys enjoy it as much as we did. As always, make sure you stay tuned after our conversation with Mary Laura to hear our epilepsy fave of the week. Also, thank you again to our sponsors, SK Life Science and Neurelis. Thank you for being a part of this and supporting us and making this happen. And if anyone else wants to make this happen and support us, as always, there is a link on the podcast page or on our website at whatthefpodcast.com where you could throw a few dollars our way if you feel so inclined. If not, ain't a thing. Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to What the F. We are so stoked about our guest here today. We have best-selling author Mary Laura Philpott. She recently has a book out this year called Bomb Shelter, and it talks about Mary Laura's son who was diagnosed with epilepsy at age 16, which ironically, Lexi was also diagnosed at age 16. So there's a little bit of an overlap there. And I have to say, Mary Laura, I love your book. I love it's relatable, it's poignant, and then there's humor in there. And I feel like that combination is really hard to achieve. And you do it so seamlessly. It looks seamlessly. It looks like there's no effort. But, that's part of the beauty of your writing. I know there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, but truly just really appreciate your book. It resonated with me, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people, coping with epilepsy and just the world in general.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Epilepsy is a good stand-in for just the world, as you say, whatever crazy thing that falls into your path in the world. It's a good stand-in for it.
Yes, absolutely. If you wouldn't mind, we really want to talk to you about what it's like being a caretaker for someone with epilepsy, because that's something that Lexi and I don't have experience in. And kind of, if you wouldn't mind sharing how your son was diagnosed and what that was like and just the new role it gave you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Those are all great questions. I should probably clarify just for listeners out there who are also readers. If you go to get Bomb Shelter, which I hope you will, enjoy it.
Get it.
It's not. Thank you. I should clarify. It's not a book about my son or even really about just my being his caretaker. There's a lot in Bomb Shelter. It's kind of about living through periods of uncertainty and how we do that and how we hang on to who we are and our sense of humor and all that kind of stuff. But his diagnosis and my role, as you said, of becoming the caretaker kind of gives the book a little bit of scaffolding and structure. It sets where the book begins and kind of where the book ends 2 years later. And so that is in there. But I always like to clarify that in case people go out to buy it and they're like, what, this book is about all these other things. I thought it was going to be about, this one thing.
Well, I think, and just to piggyback off of that, I think that's partially why it resonated so much with me is that living with epilepsy is living in uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, and I love how you cover recent events, such as the pandemic and COVID and all the things that have come into our world, but also come into your world. And it just feels very relatable in that sense, where I was like, yeah, I know you're not even talking about epilepsy right now, but I get that feeling, because
Yes.
that's the feeling we have every day.
Yeah. I
So,
feel like we
yeah.
all do. And we all have
Mhm.
these periods of life. I think they kind of come along cyclically, where you think everything's good, you think everything's stable, you've kind of worked out your MO for like how you get through life, and then boom, something happens that turns everything upside down.
Absolutely.
And you do have to completely recalibrate. So to actually answer your question, which I will do, what happens at the beginning of Bomb Shelter is something that happened in my life a few years ago, which is that my husband and I woke up early one morning to a sound, this banging sound that I thought was somebody banging on our front door. But it turned out to be the sound of our teenage son, who was 15, almost 16 at the time. It was 4:00 in the morning. He had gotten up to get a glass of water, left his room, made it as far as the bathroom, and just hit the tile floor. So we were hearing the sound of him hitting the floor, having a seizure. Of course, in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. The time of day, he hadn't slept well, he'd had a cold. The sound, of course, that's the sound of having a seizure, but we didn't know any of this at the time. It took us utterly by surprise, came out of nowhere. So that day, which I write about in Bomb Shelter, was just this before and after what is going on kind of day, where, we start by calling 911, and I ride with him in the ambulance, and we have this day in the hospital where they're doing EEGs, and, I just had no idea what was going on. I kept thinking, I used to work a long time ago, like 20 years ago, I worked as a copywriter in marketing for a children's hospital. And so I had all this old little tidbits, like brain lint, floating around in there of like health information that I had read 20 years ago. So of course, in the ambulance, I'm going, does he have a brain tumor? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
So this whole experience began with a huge load of uncertainty. This like, what in the world is happening? Thankfully, by the end of that day, which is miraculous, we had a diagnosis.
Wow.
My sister-in-law, my brother's wife, is a pediatric neurologist of all things. And she doesn't live where we live. She lives like 2 states away. But while we were in the ER that day, and the doctors were kind of doing what they normally do if a kid has one seizure, which is they say, it could be nothing, maybe go home, let us know if it happens again. I was calling her going, they say it could be nothing and we should go home. And she was going, no. She said, bar the door, say you won't leave without an EEG. So I was like,
We
I will
all
not
need-
leave without
We
an
all
EEG.
need a neurologist in our family.
Yeah.
I mean, just the miracle of having a pocket neurologist right there.
Yes.
So we actually, by the time we went home, at like dinner time that night, we knew what it was. It was JME, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. We didn't know much about it, but we had enough of an understanding to realize this is a type of epilepsy. Of course, there are so many different kinds, but this is a type that comes on when you're a teenager usually, and that you will likely have throughout adulthood. So it's not going to go away. This is going to be something that my son deals with on an ongoing basis going forward, and that therefore I, as his mama, am going to be thinking about on an ongoing basis going forward. And so one of the challenges in writing Bomb Shelter, the book, was also one of the challenges in my life. One of the things I was doing in the book was being really careful only to tell my story. This is, once upon a time, there was a woman who these things happened to. This thing happened to her child, and it set off her anxiety, and she had to figure out how to live through uncertainty. That's also kind of what I was doing in real life. This hadn't happened to me. I wasn't having the seizures as much as I wished if I could be a magical witch and do anything, I would trade places and make
My
it happen
mom
to me
says the
instead
same
of him.
thing.
Yeah, but it's all,
Yeah,
I guarantee you,
I hear
every
so
mom.
many moms say that.
Yeah.
Totally.
We would all do it. We would all trade.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. So what I really was trying to do at the same time I was, just literally taking care of him, like driving him to the doctor and going to pick up prescriptions and stuff like that, was kind of trying to figure out the line between what is his experience going forward and what is mine. And because all of this was happening in this phase of life where, he was midway through high school. So he was approaching the time where he would be leaving the nest. And we were already going to be kind of going through this separation that happens to, every family with parents and teenagers. It was all complicated by this thing happening and me feeling this urge to like get into his life and wrap him in bubble wrap and go everywhere with him and take perfect care of him while knowing that's not good for him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not good for
I
anybody.
can't.
So it was a complicated time.
Totally.
Yeah. You sound so much like my mom. I mean, she definitely that going off to college just 2 years after being diagnosed, seizures were still not under control. She was just like, "You're moving 8 hours away from me? No. No. Oh my God." You know,
I'm coming with you.
Yeah, I'd kind of get that whole,
Yeah.
can I follow you on Find My Friends? I'm like, "Mom, I'm going to be in Kansas. You're not going to know where I am."
No.
And, you know, just that was excruciating for them to know, okay, she's off here having seizures, but I also got to let her do her thing. And, you know, I learned a ton about my boundaries with epilepsy during that time, but
I bet.
Mom wanted to wrap me in bubble wrap, and she wanted to keep me, you know, close to her side, but that, you know, letting me spread my wings was the best thing for me, for sure.
It's what you have to do. And it's so hard because it just runs utterly contrary to this parent-child caretaking survival instinct. I mean, you hear stories about like the mom who lifted a car off her baby. And, you know, there is this adrenaline-like, but longer. It lasts longer than adrenaline. This just really elemental, instinctive thing that comes over you as a mother. And I'm sure it is the same for fathers, maybe. But when something threatens your child. And so, the instinct is step in front of it, like step in front of the attacking wolf or whatever. But first of all, you can't literally do that. I can't step between him and epilepsy. It's not possible. But it's just, that's not a time of life when that is helpful. And it's not a time of life when a kid doesn't want that.
Yeah.
They want to get as far away from mom and dad as possible.
Totally.
Yeah. It was such an awkward time for that to happen. I mean, granted, no perfect time to be diagnosed with epilepsy, but, you know, you're just gradually getting into adulthood. And, you know, especially those last few years living at home, they were like, oh, you might outgrow it, but probably not. So you grasp onto those little things, and then you get to 18, you're like, oh, crap. Okay, guess this is here for good. Yeah. And, you know, then you're just like, okay, here's my launching pad. I'm starting right now. And it was definitely kind of an awkward time where you weren't a kid, you weren't fully an adult, but you had to own it, and you had to try to take care of yourself unlike anyone else your age.
Right.
And mom and dad were sitting there going, can you please dial it back a few notches? I'm like, no, all the other kids are doing this stuff. Yeah. And that was hard.
Oh, that's so hard.
Yeah, that was hard for them to watch.
All the symbols of independence at that age, for better or for worse, some of them are good, some of them are not. But the things that at that age you think, like, if I do this, I am independent. So many of them are impacted by epilepsy. I mean, he was, at the time, I write about this in Bomb Shelter, at the time he was diagnosed, he was just a couple of months away from getting his driver's license. But now he couldn't. And
so
that
brutal.
was, you know, I just felt for him. That's such a hit. You know, to be like, oh, I'm just so ready to get in the car and drive off by myself. And now my mom has to drive me everywhere. So I was very cognizant in that time of just the fact that by virtue of being the caretaker who was there with him, like by virtue of being the person who's driving him around, I am also representing a real roadblock to him. Like, I represent something that really sucks. I represent the fact that he can't drive around. Like, I'm the one in the driver's seat. It's hard. And, you know, I never want to be, no one ever wants to be the person in their child's life that the child is like, ugh, you know. But I was that just by virtue of the fact, like, he had to get places and I had a car and he couldn't drive. And okay, I'm sorry. I got to be in the driver's seat. It's tough.
Such a good point. Yeah, mom and dad were always kind of sitting there going, are you sure you want to stay up this late? Are you sure you should go to this party? Are you sure you want to go on this trip with your friends? I'm like, yeah, I think so. I think so. And it wasn't until years later where I'm like, okay, Lexi, get your shit together. But I mean, at first it was, you're right. It was, you know, the added, you're at that age where you're not fully an adult, yet your parents are telling you to keep dialing it back. And, you know, everyone else is off doing more and more things. And the parents sort of often had to be the bad guy, which was hard on both ends. And
on everybody.
Yeah, I look back and I'm like, oh man, they had to do that. But
and I feel like at that age, parents already have to do
Yeah.
that. Like,
Yes.
I didn't have epilepsy when I was a teenager, but I was told, you're not going out tonight. You're going to be home by this time. So it's, just like you said, Lexi, it's just amplifying that, the restrictions, and then also the reminder of why you can't, which I think, part of that acceptance is just really hard, especially I can't even imagine at such a young age. I was diagnosed at 32, so it's just a completely different story for me. But yeah, I just feel like that would just be like, it's like the constant reminder of why, which I know I struggle with sometimes as I'm like, self-policing and being like, you need to go to bed, but or Lexi and I sometimes take care of each other. And I noticed in your book, you mentioned the mothering, that we all can kind of collectively take care of each other. As soon as I read that, I thought of Lexi, because she and I are constantly mothering each other.
Yep.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Epilepsy or not, we should all be looking out for each other.
If you can find someone that you're comfortable enough with, when you hear, Landis, maybe you shouldn't do that, and I'm like, or sometimes Lexi will be like, go take a nap. Like, she's like, I don't know, just
Get
go.
some
And
sleep.
I'm like, you're right. Okay, I'll call you later. Bye. So,
pretty much.
it's just a beautiful, when you can find that community too, it's a beautiful thing. But I really like, Mary Laura, how you, from the very beginning of this conversation, delineated between your story and your son's story. And so it's such a hard question to even ask or approach, but just like, what was that like for you?
Yeah.
One, to like, just, like you said, like have like this bomb dropped on your son, but it's also dropped on you. We can't take that out of the picture. And then also how you carried on with your life as well, because it is a part of your story now. It is, but it's also, you have other parts of your story, just like we all do with epilepsy.
Yeah. I think the important thing to remember when something happens to one person in a family or in a social unit of any kind, it is happening in different ways to everybody in that family or in that unit. So, he has a story and an experience of living through having epilepsy now. My daughter has her story of how her life changed after her brother got epilepsy. My husband has his experience. I have my experience. And I've always, throughout my writing life and my writing career, been very careful about the fact that I never want to stray into telling anyone else's story. That's just it's not what I'm interested in doing. And so I really kind of had guardrails up in my head the whole time I was writing, and making sure that, as I was writing scenes where I wanted the reader to kind of hear and see and feel what something was like for me, if that scene included someone else, which, often it does, because none of us are solitary creatures, making sure that I really just almost with surgical precision used only the pieces of that person's experience that I needed to tell my story in that scene. I also did, some other kind of protective things. Like I don't use my children's names in my writing. I really don't develop them as characters. I mean, memoir is a true story, but in a lot of ways it functions similarly to fiction. I mean, it's still a story you read on paper. It's got dialogue, it's got pacing, it's got plot, all that stuff. So even though they're real people, the people in a memoir are characters, and the writer develops them or doesn't develop them, just like you develop or don't develop characters in fiction. And I really did not want to develop the characters of my children in this book, because again, it's not about them. This is a book about being an adult, pretty well into adulthood, and having your world turned upside down, and how you keep going. The timing of all this, we had kind of 1 year under our belts before the pandemic hit. Okay. And in that year, so he was diagnosed in December. The following spring, my first book came out, I Miss You When I Blink. That was 2019. I was on tour for much of that year, going around signing books and talking about books. So that kind of ate up that part of that year. And that was a period of time where I just had to build a firewall in my brain. And it was like, this side of my brain is going to go off and do these events and sign books and smile and take pictures and do my work. And then this side of my brain is just absolutely on fire thinking about my kid and how he's doing. And when do we have our next neurologist appointment? And how many of this pill is he taking right now? And then when do we switch it up to more and then less of this one? I had these graphs written out because that when you're figuring
does
out your
my mom.
medication and you've got to like titrate this one up and titrate this one down. And now you're going to add a little L-carnitine. You know, it was,
Mm-hmm.
I
You
had
stare at the MediMinder and you're like, what's next?
Right.
What am I supposed
so
to
I had
do?
half my brain just running, constantly thinking about him and that stuff. And then half my brain attending to this very important time in my professional life. And I mean, it was just like my head split in two. I had 2 tracks going at once. That was 2019.
That sounds like very healthy compartmentalizing.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
they say not to compartmentalize, but honestly, it gets me through.
how else do you survive?
I
don't know.
We were just talking about that before this. We're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Lexi was like, "Are you excited for your date tonight?" I'm like, "I'm not thinking about it until I'm done with work."
Yeah.
Like, I will be, but not now.
No, I think it's a wonderful, amazing blessing that the human mind lends itself to compartmentalization so well, because there are just some
Mhm.
things you cannot do at the same time.
yeah.
So
Right.
that was 2019. 2020 came along and, you know, that was 2020. That was the end, you know,
Then
spring
that
of 20,
happened.
right. Spring of 2020 was the spring of his junior year. So, you know, school shut down the spring of his junior year. By
Mm.
that point, he had, you know, we'd worked out his medicine pretty well. He was pretty stable. And then we had all this time at home, which was so weird. I almost felt, I remember telling my husband this and being like, okay, don't laugh at me. But I had been going through this sort of mental period of sort of advanced mourning or like anticipatory grief over the fact that he was going to graduate and leave home, and then my next kid was going to graduate and leave home, and like this leaving was beginning. And so very secretly, quietly, only inside my own head, I kept sometimes thinking, oh, I just wish I could get him back. And then the pandemic happened and I got them back every day in my house. And I was like, did I make that happen? I know I didn't make that
manifest
happen,
this? Yeah.
but did I? And so we, you know, the pandemic, of course, was a horrible, awful event that had terrible repercussions the world over. But here in this little household, for this one person, this mom, who was at the brink of having to let her kids go, there was something about that time that to me felt like the most miraculous, amazing gift. I got a year of having them just all to myself before I had to start letting them go.
That's a really beautiful silver lining.
Yeah. And I was writing this book at the time, so professionally I had more time to work every day than I normally have, because I'm usually kind of, you know,
Sure.
out and about and doing things and traveling, and all that was gone. So I was really much more immersed in this project than in anything I ever have been before, which I think made it a better book. So that, you know, the time since he was diagnosed has kind of fallen into these different sections, and they've all been so strange and so different.
That makes sense. And I can relate to that too, especially just during the pandemic. Like, it was like one of those things I didn't even want to say out loud. I almost felt guilty that like my seizure frequency just dropped
Yeah.
significantly
Yep.
because I didn't realize how stressful a commute to work was, or, you know, all of these things that sucked out energy. And then all of a sudden I was like 4 months seizure free, and I was like, I don't want to tell anyone that I'm benefiting from this horrible, horrible thing. But, you know, it's like, I love how you put that. Like, it's just like this one person in this one house, you know, that's how I felt too. Just like having like a little bit of silver lining.
Yeah, I didn't-
from something.
Mine was the opposite. I was still having tons of seizures during the pandemic, but it didn't bother me as much because I was like, well, this is what I'm used to, you know, being stuck inside, not seeing people a ton. So I almost felt like the whole world was kind of getting a little dose of what we're used to on a daily basis. You know, I mean, obviously it was horrible, but, you know, just for me personally, I was like, this is not too outside of the box for what my normal life is usually like. And so, you know, that whole not seeing your friends and not seeing extended family, I was like, I'm used to this. So,
But I saw them more because now everyone was doing Zoom. It felt like everyone just like came to my level. And I was like, now you guys all can't do the things I can't do.
yeah,
either.
exactly.
And we're all
Yes.
And so then I was like,
That's how it felt.
I'm more social than I've been in like 3 years, like, because we're all meeting on FaceTime, and, you know, and my sister-in-law, I said that to her in one of like we were having like siblings FaceTimes every Sunday, which we had never done before. And now we were doing. I know, it was awesome. And I said this to her. I said, you know, it's kind of cool because everyone's at my level. And she's like, yeah, the only thing is that we'll get ours back and you won't.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that acknowledgement because I was like, that's, that's true.
It was
like,
kind of hard.
And then people start going out again. I was like, damn.
Yeah.
it.
Like the past few summers when things started kicking up again, I'd be like, oh, now everyone's gone. I'm still stuck inside.
Here I am.
And but
although I do think a lot of people learned things about themselves that they didn't know before about
Totally
appreciating a slower pace.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I did. Like I used to say, I do my best work when I'm multitasking. When I have a bunch of jobs and I'm just spread thin and I'm, going all hours, that's just how I thrive. And then the pandemic came along and I couldn't do that. And I did such better work and I was happier and I was calmer and I felt better. So as we've emerged from it, I've been trying to kind of hang on to that more and like keep that slower pace. I've become a little bit of a hermit. I really just kind of like being around my house and my yard and
I feel like,
saying no to things.
Yeah.
Great.
A lot of people are focusing on self-care.
Oh, totally. I think there's a lot of that with working from home and all of those things, we appreciate a little bit more now. But it's funny, Mary Laura, as you were talking about how the pandemic did that to you, that's kind of what epilepsy did to me. Because before I was diagnosed, I was like always on the go. I was writing till 2 a.m. I was waking up at 6 and then out the door. And then all of a sudden it was like, nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree. I had the same mentality where I thought that I was the best when I was multitasking. And then I learned, I was like, I hated finding a silver lining with my epilepsy. I was like so bitter, but like, but it's there. Mm-hmm. But I do, take a little more time to do things and I do one thing at a time. So I don't have a seizure later, but it's also, I've gotten more gratification out of the work that I do.
Yeah.
I
think we want to believe that we're great at multitasking. We want to be able to justify it, but it's not really great for anybody. I mean, I think there have been studies on this that like when you are multitasking a whole bunch, the quality of work you do goes down.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Or like, procrastinating is just how I roll. And now I'm like, we don't do that anymore.
Does not work.
Procrastinate in this house.
Does not work.
So I we do have a question for you too. Lexi and I have had conversations with ourselves and then also with other people with epilepsy that a lot of times we feel like a burden to the person who has to take care of us. And, the best way to approach that is obviously have a conversation about it and things like that. But I guess I'm just curious from like the other side. We talk to people who relate to us and feel like the burden, but someone on the other side of caretaking, like I'm not asking if your son has ever said that or anything like that, but what is like your response to that sentiment?
I think it's such a natural, normal human thing not to want to be a burden. And I don't have epilepsy, but I have felt that, I don't want to be a burden thing so many times.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we do this, we crazy little human beings. But, if you turn it around and you ask me, well, does it feel like a burden to you when you need to help someone else out? No, it never does. So why do I assume that I am a burden to other people? I don't know, but I think we all do it. We all do that, like, I would love to help you, but I couldn't possibly ask you to help me. That would make me a burden. The best thing I know to do is just continually turn it around and ask yourself, am I put out when someone needs my help? No. In fact, I think listeners go Google this for actual information because this is like a tiny, again, little piece of brainlet that's sticking around.
I love that
I don't even
brainlet.
know. It's what my brain is full of. It's like the dryer screen in there. I swear I read
we're
something.
Stealing it.
Do it. I swear I read something once about a psychological study where if you ask someone to help you with something or you ask someone a favor, in the future, they feel more bonded to you and more likely to want to do things for you. And I wish I could remember the context of this.
That makes sense.
Go Google it. Because there's something to this. But generally, I think, except for maybe when people are just not very nice, people like to help each other. And I love being needed. I love helping. I love doing things for other people. And without getting too personal about him, I will say my son is the same way. He's such a helper guy. He loves to be needed. He loves to work. He loves to have a sense of duty and commitment and feel like he's made a difference. And so, I do remind him of that often. And I would remind anybody, either of you or anyone else who ever feels like, oh, I might be a burden, no. Anybody who's actually involved in your life and cares about you is not going to feel that you're a burden. Just like you do not feel that the people in your life that you actually care about are burdens.
I love that.
Totally.
It was something about like, if you want to count on people for something big later, ask them for something small now. It might even have been in a political context. Like, if you're going to be asking people to vote for you, ask them for a small campaign contribution at first, because then they feel like, oh, I helped that person. I'm on their team, and they're more likely to stay on your team. It's something about it stuck with me. And I think about it a lot. The fact that people like to help other people. It makes people feel good.
I love that. I need to find that.
I don't even know what to tell you to begin to Google it, but good luck.
Thank you. Oh, well, Mary Laura, this has truly been such a pleasure having you on and hearing, what you have to share and your insight. It's just so nice to hear from, and I hate saying like the other side, but it is kind of, like you said from the beginning, there's the story, there's your son's story, there's your story.
Mm-hmm.
And also, by the way, I didn't even notice until like the end of the book that you hadn't named your children.
Yeah.
You wrote that in so well. I was like, do I know their, I was like, I don't know their names. Oh my God. Like you just did such a good job with that. It wasn't until the very end that I was like, did I forget them? Because that's very possible, but and then I started flipping back. I was like, this is brilliant. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I also, part of me, it was also a creative decision in that I wanted, when you're reading that book and you come across the words, my son, my daughter, I want your brain to register that as my son, like yours.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I want the stuff I write to be an immersive experience. I want to put you in that headspace that I'm in, because the whole reason I'm doing it, the whole point to telling these stories is to connect with each other and alleviate the loneliness that we all are kind of naturally have, thinking like, I only live in my little head and you live in your little head and we're all alone, but if we can kind of cross those barriers and connect, I think it just makes us all feel better. So there was a creative reason to that too, but I'm glad you feel like it worked. Thank you.
Your book definitely does that. You feel your experience, but then feel my own experience at the same time. So it's just the way that it relates and resonates is so spot on. It really is.
Thank you.
And so thank you. Thank you for writing it. We're so
keep putting them out so we can keep reading them.
Yep, absolutely.
I'll try. Thank you so much for having me. This was a joy.
Absolutely. This was so fun. Thank you. Okay, here's our epilepsy fave of the week. It is a company called Temporal Tees, and they have very funny shit about epilepsy, from shirts to stickers to mugs to glasses. Absolutely check them out. They have an Etsy page, and if you just type in Temporal Tees, you'll find them. They're also on Instagram. Highly recommend their stuff. And as always, our epilepsy faves do not pay to be featured on here. We just really want to uplift anyone who's doing anything who has epilepsy in the community. So if you want to be featured, just reach out to us via our website at whatthefpodcast.com. Okay, next week, guys. Bye.